seconds for some people, some other people to join, and then we'll kick this off. How many do we have now? All right. Well, let's get it going. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know about the last thing people needed was another Zoom call in their life, but we appreciate all the support for Cornet Carolinas, and just on behalf of Cornet Carolinas, the panelists, Peter, Rainey, and Sharon, just really want to thank you for your time. So for joining us for the Adaptive Reuse 2.0, Repurposing Boxes to New Workplaces panel discussion. So real quick, some housekeeping items. With as many people as we have on the call, which we've had over 70, close to 80 people, which is fantastic. We are going to have everyone muted. So when we have questions, please submit them in the chat, and then we'll work through them as we go. Just some other scheduling things. Jessica will jump on here real quick. Jessica Douglas will jump on and do some of the board announcements. And then we'll do about 20 minutes of some of the kind of canned questions, and then really leave a bulk of the time, about half an hour or so, for you all to submit your questions, because that's one of the things that we've heard a lot, is you guys really want to get more engaged in interaction with the panelists, those that you guys are here to listen to. And then also, we know an hour is a lot of time, so if some of you guys have to drop off, we will have things continue the discussion for the other half an hour that's remaining, if those that want to stay on are interested. And if we don't get through all the questions, please continue to submit them. The panelists have agreed to kind of type up some responses, and we can distribute those out to everybody. But we will also have this recorded, so you'll be able to get that recording, and it'll be accessible on the Cornet Carolinas website. So real quick, I'm Todd Benner. I'm VP of Market Development and Interior Elements, and I will be playing the role of moderator. So hopefully I can do less talking, and everyone else, you guys don't have to listen to me. And then we'll introduce the panel after Jessica, or let them introduce themselves really, after Jessica does the board announcements. So Jessica, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Thanks, Todd. Good morning, everyone, and happy holidays. It is December. Did we imagine that we were going to be here? I mean, this is crazy. We've gotten through this entire year, and I just want everybody to give themselves a huge round of applause for getting through this year. It has been a crazy one for sure. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this last Raleigh Cornet program of 2020. It's going to be an amazing panel, and I'm not going to take up too much of your time so we can get to the panel. As we close this year, we want to express how grateful we are for all of the members and sponsors that make this chapter such an amazing organization. Despite the challenges of this year, this organization has truly stepped up and adapted so beautifully. I want to specifically thank Greg Capst and Cindy Suarez and the entire programs committee, who have continually pushed to make these virtual programs relevant, informative, and exciting. If you haven't already, please mark your calendars and sign up to join us for a virtual networking event on January 14th from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. This event is going to be combining our typical December CRC giving event with this networking event. So there will be an opportunity to donate to a great cause while catching up with all your Cornet's Carolina network on January 14th. From our Cornet Carolinas president, Anna Marshall, and the entire board, we want to celebrate all the successes that this chapter has had this year despite the challenges. And maybe even, in fact, because of some of the challenges, we've pivoted and really created some amazing things this year. Next week, all of the members will be receiving an email from Cornet Carolinas to register for a member appreciation gift that will be sent out in early 2021. We could not do what we do without our members and sponsors, so please keep an eye out for this email. And now, without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Todd, who will introduce our panel.
Thanks, Jessica. Appreciate it. So let's get into the introduction. So Peter, if you want to kick it off, then Rainey, and then Sharon, that'd be great.
Sure. My name is Peter Tonon. I am a partner at a company called Main Street Capital that we started a little over 20 years ago in South Florida and here in North Carolina. And We've over the years invested mostly in suburban and CBD office buildings and industrial buildings in Southeast and Southwestern United States. In the last 5 or 6 years, been heavily involved in new construction of multifamily, and also the things we're talking about today, the reuse and repurposing of existing facilities for another use.
Rainey?
Great. I am Rainey Shane. I am a vice president in our project and development services group for JLL Southeast Central. And I joined JLL about 4 years ago after working for 4 years straight on Ponce City Market, which is an adaptive reuse project in Atlanta. On the developer side, I joined JLL Interiors Group and quickly realized that I needed to get back to adaptive reuse projects because that was where my passion and my love was. So I created JLL's first adaptive reuse division, and we're about 4 years strong now, and we're growing, and that's primarily what I work on.
Right, thanks. Sharon?
Hey, everybody. I am Sharon Crawford. I am studio principal of interiors at Little, located in one of the best. I think it's cool to be able to be sitting in American Tobacco campus. Obviously, a great adaptive reuse. But my experience over the years has ranged working really, really closely with architects, creating the interiors, really focusing, on experience and placemaking. And my projects, I guess, have ranged from, taking schools or retail spaces, shopping malls, and converting them to, say, a library, a theater in one case, and of course, many offices, and have done lab to office and now doing office to lab. So yeah, just real excited to be here to talk about this subject today. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Sharon. So really kind of cracking it, getting into it, starting from maybe the high level, getting to maybe some of the granular things later and some questions. Now, as a developer, project manager, architect, when you hear adaptive reuse, what does that mean to you? What is the first thing that comes to mind? Peter?
Opportunity. Opportunity. Because buying an income property today is very tough. Prices are, how our investors want a certain return, and it's not available in existing leased assets. The market up until March of this year was very fluid, very healthy. And so I'd say opportunities for value add opportunities to take something and make more of it were limited. And this is one area really where we've been successful in the past, and I think there's going to be more opportunities. So I see opportunity.
Cool. Rainey?
Well, when someone comes to me and asks me about an adaptive reuse project, I think the first thing that I think of is historical building or old building. In Atlanta, they're not going to tear down a building. That we have typically liked to tear things down in Atlanta. So sustainable reuse of existing building stock is pretty important to me. So that's what I think of. Unfortunately, I think a lot of clients come to me saying, I want an adaptive reuse. And really what they're saying is, I want an adaptive reuse aesthetic. And they're saying, I want exposed brick or timber, somewhere in the building. So there's a little bit of education that goes on. But typically, I think sustainable reusing old or historic properties.
Right. Sharon?
And finally, I would say revitalization. And it's interesting, Rainey says, historic. So I personally have not been involved in a lot of historic. Mostly the ones that I've been involved with are really ugly buildings that people want to repurpose. And so I see kind of disadvantaged, properties and such that, we're revitalizing, bringing back the character. Definitely, I love opportunity, sustainability, all that as well. But interesting take on what I've worked with in the past has been mostly the ugly building type.
Gotcha. Making ugly pretty again. Got it.
Exactly.
So, you guys started touching on some of these things, but, kind of getting into the big why, why you go about doing these things, and, or, even to the bigger picture, Peter, why are we seeing more, at least I'm seeing more and more of these project typologies occurring in our space now, in our environments and in our cities. Can you maybe hit some of the triggers of the whys behind why you've seen that happen?
Yeah, I think because things change. When I first said, for instance, if anybody who's lived in the Northeast, I mean, this is not a new thing. I mean, historic renovations in the 70s and 80s, taking old multi-story factories from the 18 and 1900s and turning them into apartment buildings, and then it became creative office. And I think demand and demographic shifts create opportunities. And as we're seeing in the South now, and obviously Atlanta, even Raleigh and Charlotte, we're seeing older buildings or buildings that were used for something else because of population shifts, because of demographics, because of growth. All of a sudden now, that vacant Sears store that is in a closed mall, all of a sudden has a valuable use for something else, like an Amazon distribution center or creative office, or a life science GMP facility. So I think it's really because of demographic shifts and movements and supply and demand, and tenants and users. I think they like being able to walk into a situation like this and recreating something versus starting it from scratch. That's been our experience.
Rainey or Sharon, do you guys have anything to add to maybe any of that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely there's a cultural shift in the way we use buildings changes as we go through time. A lot of the baby boomers like to shop very differently than the way we shop now. Industrial revolution, there's a lot of manufacturing, industrial type properties. We're moving into, the technology revolution where that's not needed. Those buildings are very well built, and they're large, so we can use them for different things. I think one of the other things is people want to spend less money, and studies have shown that if you do it properly, you can spend 60 to 70% on adapting an old building than a new ground up development. So a lot of clients that come to me do it because it's less expensive than a ground up development. And obviously, if done right, you can do that. I think I will leave some of the placemaking with Sharon.
Yeah, I was just going to add, location seems to be another reason why you choose, a space like, I know in Charlotte, that Freedom Mall, we turned that into the Valerie Woodward Center, which is the Mecklenburg County offices, right? So it was all about that being, this mall located, out in a disadvantaged kind of area. They were looking to get into the regions, right? A lot of county services want to be, close to their people, right? So location seems to be, a key. If you own a building on a campus, like at Food Line, they own a storage warehouse building. They ran out of space. So it's a perfect opportunity to then repurpose their building because they owned it and because of the location. So it seems like location too, right, Rainey, is a key piece.
Yeah, I mean, you do have a lot of amazing building stock in some fantastic locations. And if you're in a historic district, you can't actually tear that building down. So they have to reuse it, which I love those situations because, again, I don't like to tear things down. So, I mean, I think that people are attached to the history. Adaptive reuse, there is an attachment to history that's pretty important. And at Ponce City Market, one of the major things that we did was we tried to keep a lot of the history, honor the history of the building. We even used equipment and like the old DC panels, and we created art pieces throughout the whole project with those, just because people are really attached to the history, and that creates that place, you know, the placemaking piece of it.
Plus, in the Southeast panel, the urbanization of the cities of the Southeast has had a big driver to this, especially a place like Atlanta. You know, when I moved here 25 years ago, there wasn't much urbanization in Raleigh, Charlotte, or even Atlanta, quite frankly. It was, you know, there were suburban markets, and certainly in the last 10, 15 years, all three of them have become, in Nashville too, very urban markets, and old buildings that have been vacant for a long time all of a sudden have great potentials for restaurants, retail, multifamily, office, creative office, and that's been a big driver of that too.
Mm-hmm.
I will also just kind of add, thinking on what Peter was saying, in a lot of this old building stock, the materials and the architectural elements that exist can't be reproduced.
Exactly.
Or the cost that you could, you know, for something a lot less quality. So at Ponce City Market, we had all kinds of exposed brick, solid maple hardwood flooring, and 175,000 square feet of that place. You know, timber beams and timber columns, arched brickwork. I mean, you can't recreate that now for anywhere near the same cost. So that's another big piece. I think the popularity of sustainability and, you know, climate change and protecting the environment, I think probably a lot of people on here know that you can spend as little as 20 to 30% on an adaptive reuse building in kind of your mechanical, your envelope areas, and get the same type of sustainable building than you could building a new ground up LEED development. You can be greener in an adaptive reuse property for a lot less money. So I think as we continue to move towards more environmentally friendly, carbon neutral type environments, we'll see a lot more adaptive reuse.
So, I mean, Rainey, you kind of touched on this a little bit too, of the kind of past history of Atlanta, a lot of tear down. I mean, Charlotte went through that quite a bit too. You know, how do you start to weigh, and Peter, even after maybe Rainey weighs in on this, is, you know, there's metrics. You obviously the project has to pencil out, you know, it's got to work. But at the same time, are there intrinsic things that you identify a property for, but kind of run that over under, you know, versus tearing it down and rehabbing it? You know, are there key triggers that say, okay, this just isn't viable, we need to go there, or it's worth spending the money? And, you know, how does that decision matrix happen? How does it go about?
Well, for me, first of all, you look at the functionality of it. Okay. Is it a box? Okay. Is it vertical? And once you've established that it's functionally reusable, then you pretty much have a good base to say, okay, now what's it going to be based on the location it's in? And chances are, if it's functional, in other words, it has column spacing, it has high ceilings, it has, you know, it's not something that has, you're not buying an old cotton warehouse that has, you know, firewalls every 15 feet or something. But I mean, something that is functional. It's standing, it's functional, it's structurally fairly sound, and it's in a decent location. You can pretty much make the numbers work right from there, as long as you have that basic functionality to it. Because if you don't have that, then you're gonna be working with recreating something that isn't there, like raising a ceiling or knocking down walls, and now you're getting into costs that immediately you're gonna start scratching your head at me and say, I'm not sure this is gonna work. So for me, it's basic functionality of it.
So Rainey, how do you shepherd developers, owners, investors through that process and kind of that decision-making matrix, if you will, of, you know, getting down to the, all right, yeah, we can do this. We're going to invest money here and do it here.
I'm not going to lie. It gets pretty messy at times. The interesting thing and the way that I like to approach a project is, if you know you want to keep the building, to Peter's point, you can make it work. but it takes a lot of iteration and pivoting. And when
contingency.
Yeah, contingency. I mean, 15% is like really low. But what I typically like to do is start to run some numbers on concepts and iterate based on concepts. So I had this one client that had a building. It was, I think, 200,000 square feet. They knew they wanted to keep the building, and they knew they wanted to go for historic tax credits, which is a big piece of the capital stack. And I must have run close to 42 pro forma concepts on every mix that you could possibly think of, all office, all retail, all multifamily, 20% multifamily. Like, I mean, the combinations were endless, and we finally landed upon a mix that penciled. And that's where a good project manager comes in, because they can start to put some numbers to concept before you say, well, this is what we're going to do. Also with JLL, I mean, we have a research department, and so we're able to let them know, what does the market support? What kind of absorption for office leasing are you going to get in this area? So that helped us craft the right mix. But sometimes it just takes a lot of iterations to land upon what's going to actually pencil. And like Peter said, you can always make it pencil. It may not be what they want to build, but we need to build what the community wants them to build.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's a great point. I mean, all of us, I think, can attest to the fact that on the surface, when people see the final product of something like, Ponce, which is really arguably a fantastic redevelopment. It's really one of the best I've seen anywhere, and so successful, and had such an impact on the community. When you see that, you say, wow, I wish I could have done that, which is great. But the reality is, from conception to completion, we all could say this process is a lot more challenging and a lot more difficult than anyone can imagine. And that this is not this old house where, you see a great old Victorian house and say, oh yeah, strip this and do the floors over, knock a few walls and this is so much more than that. And as everyone can attest to, invariably in something like this, you always find something along the way that you weren't. It's like, where did that come from? Those weren't in the plans. That wasn't there. And it can be a little heart-wrenching and a little gut-wrenching in the process. When it's all done, it's great, and there's a tenant in there or two tenants. Oh, great! But in the meantime, it's challenging. It requires, but quite frankly, that's the challenge. Personally, I like that challenge. It's a challenge that for me, I'd rather do something like that than find a piece of dirt and build something from the ground up. Repurposing something is a great intellectual challenge, and generally you're also the other advantage to this is you generally are giving something the community really does need. Really, that they're going to like and they're going to need, and look back and say, we're glad, because you have to work with local officials, local rezoning, and you got to convince them, and they want to make sure what you're doing has some residual value to the community. You're doing it also, not just for yourself.
Yeah. Well, so Sharon, we were talking, I mean, this brought up again from concept through this process. Obviously, you guys are key from the design perspective on that concept. An owner definitely has visions when they come to the table. So how do you take that, start to understand exactly what you're talking about, the community, how it's plugging in, and sometimes even maybe push and kind of push the envelope and challenge? Because I think that's, look for those opportunities and really kind of work with that team. How do you guys do that? And what's, really, how do you start getting into that and set visions?
Well, key is, definitely assembling everybody up front and, have the vision session, obviously, where you're talking about what is the why. And, hopefully you've got the contractor, you've got, the owner, stakeholders, whoever at the table, because understanding what are the key drivers, like you got to understand what the goals are first, right? And so you understand that. And then from there, I think another key thing is just investigation of the building, doing your due diligence. That's huge, right? And, having a contractor on board early, you can do some selective demolition, hopefully, so you can really, because you're right, Peter, you're definitely going to, unforeseen conditions are definitely going to jump up and bite you. And so everybody needs to have that that heart going in that, you know, this is just, you know, we are gonna have to pivot. We are gonna have to, you know, rethink throughout the thing, especially, I mean, think about COVID and all the projects that are ongoing right now, and how we've had to pivot. There's so many of them out there. I know working at Gensler, we were working on several projects where, yeah, I mean, we were thinking creative office, but looking like lab and life science is the way to go now. So I think just, you know, definitely the drivers, the goals, and then also what are, you know, trying to get in, once you do some of that investigation, maybe what are the intrinsic qualities? Are there any, you know, what are the unique characteristics? What can you capitalize on? And I'll say one more thing because I'm going on and on. Todd, you know, I kind of came in on the tail end of the Parkline project, which is the iconic, you know, old Blue Cross Blue Shield. And, you know, that's a great example of, you know, that went from a single tenant, you know, it's multi-tenant. So it's not, you know, it's kind of the balance, you know, kind of just is called adaptive reuse at the surface. But, you know, that basement area, it wasn't usable before. And now it was leased up. That was the first tenant that signed on because of the green, because of the amenities, because of really looking at the character and what the opportunities were there. Back to Peter's opportunity is what you want to look for.
Great, thanks.
I want to add one thing.
Yeah,
when Sharon's talking about getting all of the stakeholders together and figuring out what the goals are, I will tell you that when a developer, or rather an owner, comes to you and said, this is the scope, here's the building, this is what we want to do with it, this is the scope, you shouldn't automatically just accept that. You have to dig a lot deeper, because sometimes they have prescribed a scope that doesn't really meet the goals of what they think. Adaptive reuse is a really interesting animal, and I would say the visioning process has to really dig deep to figure out what it is they really want out of that project, and then set the scope. So I've gone down some paths many times with people and spent a lot of money just to realize that what they thought they wanted is not really what they wanted.
Yeah.
Right.
I think too.
What I learned is I walk in and say to someone like you guys and say, well, this is what I think. What do you think? That's a good question to ask up front, because what I think and what they think, and you really do have to be, it's one thing having a vision and create, that's one thing, but eventually that vision has to be carried out. And if the team you have of architects and engineers and contractors and development team is not on the same page, you're in for a big mess.
Yeah. Well, and go ahead and meet with the jurisdiction, you know, Morrisville, Durham, Mecklenburg, I mean, wherever you are, I mean, like, just go ahead and embrace them, bring them in on, you know, what you're thinking, and just see, you know, what are the pitfalls? What are we going to experience, and get them on board early.
And some we know up there can be more challenging than others.
Yes, very much so.
But mainly because, you know, you're walking in with a whole creative set of experience, and they have a particular job to do, and they're fitting things into boxes. And it is a collaboration. You really do. And you have to express to them why you're doing it and the benefit of it, not to win their side, but to really get their input too, because they really, this is going to be something you're going to leave in their community. And me as an owner might not be there 10 more years. Okay. And if you walk into the idea, I'm going to do this, build this, and get out, I mean, yeah, okay, thanks. But you really need to let them know that this is something we're going to leave eventually, that we want to have a positive impact on your community. And they don't have the experience and the training to have that vision. They have a task to carry out within a certain set of parameters in terms of permits and zoning and traffic studies and impact on the local community. And, you know, you're sitting there saying, wait, I just want to get this bunch of tenants in there and get it leased up and sold. And they're like, wait a minute. They're not coming from the same angle as you. So that requires a lot of explanation. a lot of explanation. So.
Gotcha. Well, I want to move a little bit to, and again, everyone that's listening in, please submit questions to the chat, but there's some that have come up. So I want to pivot to that real quick, but you guys talked about a number of things that even I have some other questions can ask. One of the ones that came up here, which is interesting with the current environment, is how does the impact of social injustice events affected adaptive reuse pipeline projects in the urban and downtown areas? What effects have you guys seen? Peter, do you want to launch into that first, if any?
You know, I would say that it's, if anything, for instance, for Charlotte, I can't really say Raleigh because the downtown isn't as vibrant as Charlotte. But in Charlotte, I would say, if anything, it's just paused. It's paused them. You know, with this question, for instance, in Charlotte of, at least in the CBD, okay, what's CBD going to look like a year from now? Who's going to be here? You know, so that's the first thing. On the other hand, in the surrounding, I'd say, predominant adaptive reuse communities like South End and NoDa and West End, I mean, I read about something every 2 weeks, or somebody bought it old and they're going to rehab it for office or something else. And by the way, with restaurants and breweries closing by the day and new ones opening up. So there seems to be still a, I think, driven by a demographic where people still do want to live in those areas regardless. And secondly, we're already starting to see, I think, the perhaps long-term effect of some of this stuff. And people are moving out of the big cities and coming south. They're coming. We're starting to see it now. You know, they're coming down here. They've the 28-year-old that was working in the city and came home to live with mom and dad for 9 months because they had to, and there was nothing going on in New York. Like, I'm not going back. You know, and I figured out a way to work here. I run into a 28 or 30-year-old every week that has done this. So I think in those areas, they seem to be really, really strong. I think for the CBD, still a question mark.
Okay, great. Rainey, do you guys have anything else to add to that?
Well, I will say that it's a little hard to pinpoint that because a lot of those projects in the adaptive reuse pipeline went on pause at COVID, you know, and so when two things happen at the same time, it's hard to figure out which was the cause. And so we had a lot of projects pause. We had a lot of projects temporarily close that were in protest related areas just because they kept grabbing our scaffolding and using it in a protest way. I think though the good thing is that at least in Atlanta, we're starting to see some real thoughtful legislation around how they're using opportunity zones and economic incentives. And I think that hopefully there's a bit more balance in those areas. You know, developers of adaptive reuse properties typically try to use some kind of economic incentive to help fund those projects. So I'm hoping that there's going to be more adaptive reuse as kind of the opportunity zones and the economic incentives catch up with, you know, what's going on with social injustice. At least in Atlanta, that's what we're kind of seeing.
Gotcha. Thank you. One of the other questions that came up here is how the challenge, which you touched on a little bit, but I think maybe Sharon, you could jump in a little bit deeper, maybe case studies or something. The challenge of existing conditions and adaptive reuse project drive creative solutions.
Yeah, I mean, just like I was saying, I mean, you have to look at the bones of the buildings, you know, and how I do like the way that Rainey put, you know, taking the bones, looking at, you know, what qualities, what intrinsic, you know, what is it, what characteristics. Maybe just look at it. I mean, so many times, you know, we've just taken it down to the bones and, you know, it's just, you know, columns standing and slab is, you know, all you have. And then how do you, you know, recreate from there? But taking in the history and such, I think Parkline is yet another great example of the branding that went on around that project, using the angle and Parkline, the whole team. I think that's just a great outcome and a creative solution to, for branding that building, forever now, and as a multi-tenant space. So, Michael Wagner, Allison Briggs, those guys at Gensler, we were working on the Stitch, which is, the old outlet mall there at near the airport. And the one thing that always was like sticking in our craws, like, oh my God, what do we do with that cupola? The clock,
Right.
And, initial thinking was, oh, we got to get rid of that thing. All of us, I think the whole team was on board. But recently, Michael's told me that they've now embraced that, and then that's kind of so it's going to be, they're going to clad it and, use it. So there's another creative solution to, kind of the intrinsic qualities of a property.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of property comes with cheat sheets. At Ponce City Market, we looked at the floor loading, and it was an old Sears distribution warehouse, and they used to store product, and the floors had like a crazy high dead and live load per square foot. And so we're like, well, okay, that's a parking lot. We can park cars in here. We looked at areas where we found hardwood floors, and we're like, okay, well, that would make great office or retail. We found areas that didn't have a lot of light, and because we were going for historic tax properties, we couldn't punch openings into the facade. So we said, well, that doesn't have a lot of light. That maybe isn't office. That could be something else. And so you kind of look at these elements and you think, well, what could it be? And that starts to drive some of the creativity around how you design it.
Yeah, typically you're taking and looking at it, how to make it more transparent, right? It seems like always whether it's an ugly building or a historic building, sometimes, the light is huge, right? And how do you bring light in? It seems like in a lot of projects, we're looking at how do we add clerestory? Do we take the roof off? Do we, all those things? Yeah, just looking at what are the key. Campbell, I know Little, I was talking to Michael Coates last week, and they took a laundry room that was on the campus and turned it into a classroom space. But again, it was because there were the large, spaces. Right. And so, yeah, to Rainey's point, just, making sure that you're, the function is there, Peter, like you said, right. How do you see that function?
So one of the questions, Peter, that came in is, have you had any situations where the plan was to reuse a property? So that was your intent going in and obviously selecting that piece of property, but the best solution ended up being tear down and or rebuilt. And so what, maybe you had a case study, or is there, what was the trigger that you just couldn't make it work out?
Not yet. We're doing a project in Phoenix right now, which was kind of that. It was 250,000 foot office buildings, and in a great location, 7th and Missouri, which is, the South End kind of thing, Charlotte of Phoenix. And there was a compelling reason to knock those buildings down and build multifamily there and retail. I mean, real compelling reason. But at the end, we're like, come on. I mean, anybody can do that, and these are 1950s office buildings, with no window lines, and basically got Gensler, and we did a big refacing of it, and we're going to do some container retail on the corner, so sometimes the numbers say go ahead and do it, but we're not multifamily developers for the most part, so we said, you know what, we're in this to actually redevelop it. So, but there are situations where you sit there and say, yeah, actually in the short run you could take advantage and you could sell the dirt for more to a multifamily developer, but on the other hand, you can do something really good for the community and do something, that builds your business and your track record to go ahead and do it. So that, I think that's probably, it would be at least up until March, anything infill would have been multifamily retail, go vertical with it. That's because the land values were were getting so expensive.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah, I actually just had this happen in Atlanta, and we had an adaptive reuse property. It was going to be mixed use, retail, creative office, some entertainment, food, and it was about 200,000 square feet. And then we were up to CDs, and we had just gotten our permit, our LDP permit, and we were just about, I think we had just gotten our building permit, and COVID hit, and we went on pause. It all went on hold. And just last week, the developer called me back up and said, we're going to tear that whole thing down. We're going to build a new building on that lot where the existing building stood, and the adjacent lot that we own. And it's all going to be industrial last mile distribution.
Wow.
Pivot, baby.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I said, well, I got someone that you need
Wow
to
is right.
I'm not going to do that for you, but good luck.
Oh my gosh.
So have you guys experienced it, in your opinion, and I can't remember who used the word pivot. Do you find that these types of projects, it's easier to pivot, especially in this day and age with, the pandemic and just the markets changing, being able to respond to a need? Do you feel it's easier to kind of change the trajectory of a use or a project when you're doing adaptive reuse versus a ground up greenfield project?
I think so, especially if the functionality is there, because, typically when you find these things, they do have one or two or three more uses, or multiple uses within the same building, within the same footprint. And especially if it's multi-story, for instance, you could, up until 6-7 months ago, you can have retail, office, multifamily, hotel, all in the same thing. And our experience, for instance, in Raleigh was, we certainly had this great idea of filling a need for what we saw in Raleigh was a lack of creative office space in the suburbs. And it's turned out completely into a life science building. I mean, thank you. Because of the demand, but by the same token, the basic bones, what the functionality of the building lent itself to, when they walk in and see 28-foot clear stands, like, this is perfect. We'll take it, and it's a block building with stucco. Go figure. But we put some Luca bond on it. But so, yeah, you could, the reality is, I think if you have that functionality, you can be more amenable, because let's face it, once you're going to do a ground up development and you're in the ground and you're going vertical, that's what you're building. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what you're building. Okay.
I think that it's actually easier because the reason, or that building was purpose built for a use that you're not going to be using it for anyway. Right. So new ground up development, there's a purpose for it. And like Peter said, when you're coming out of the ground, that's what it is. But the adaptive reuse, you're already fighting the original use anyway.
Right.
So if it was a warehouse or a distribution center or a manufacturing plant, and you're going to turn it into an office, it's just as easy to turn it into a multifamily or turn it into retail, because it's not what it was built for anyway.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of the thing is on the front end and on the design, and Sharon, you back me up on this, but I think you have to design for future proofing, and you have to design to give you as much flexibility in your leasing, because your pre-leasing efforts, you will pivot and iterate so fast. And at Jamestown, at Ponce City Market, we built a lot of spaces for retail or for a restaurant. And we got to the point where I was like, guys, stop it until you sign an LOI. That's when we go in and we prepare the delivery condition for whatever use it's being leased for.
Right. Yeah. No, I was going to say that. Well, sorry, Todd. I was just going to add to that, sitting here, my creative side is just saying, it's kind of cool to have the challenge. But yeah, Rainey said it beautifully. It's already not being used for its purpose. And so, yeah, it definitely, like you say, you're going to go through iterations, and it's whatever the community, back to, again, what is the community? What is the market? And so pivot, we do definitely.
So jumping off of that, Sharon, do you think that in today's environment, for ground up, are we designing and building too purpose specific? Because it seems like it's easier to take some of these older buildings and turn them into whatever it was not intended for, but maybe a little bit more challenging for some of the more current product that's out there.
Easy might not be the right word. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
How logical?
More feasible. How's that? More
Flexible.
feasible.
More feasible.
Hey.
I don't know. Interesting question. I don't know. Certainly, I mean, you think about, I mean, I don't know, studies. I mean, we've been doing studies for a while, you know, all the research out there about parking decks becoming offices and that kind of, so I don't know, I mean, certainly all parking decks we're building, you know, I think you have, I don't know, I think the mentality today is even in commercial office buildings and such, like you still have to have the mentality of what could it be, you know, flexibility is just huge.
Okay.
I don't know.
So there was a question that came in. Rainey, you had mentioned historical tax credits as part of the capital stack. What are some of the other elements of the capital stack, and how have you applied them to move projects forward that would otherwise be a no-go?
Oh man, you're gonna get me talking for the next hour on this. We try to throw everything at the capital stack we can possibly think of. The business economic incentives of whatever area you're in, opportunity zones, new market tax credits, brownfield tax credits, film tax credits, historical tax credits. I mean, anything that we can possibly throw at the capital stack, we will, because I will do everything in my power to keep a building from getting torn down and to be able to do an adaptive reuse as opposed to tearing it down and doing a ground up. So there's public-private partnerships that have, you know, a lot of jurisdictions and municipalities are really attached to their buildings and their history. And so there are a lot of public-private partnerships that can help have a project work that normally wouldn't have. All of those economic incentives, all of those public-private partnerships have absolutely been the tipping point on whether a project moved forward or it, you know, died on the vine.
Agree.
All right. I want to go back to kind of the team. Early on when we talked about is getting people to the table early, having those discussions. A couple questions to that is, how essential in your all's mind that every member of the team, as you're bringing them on, all have adaptive reuse experience? And if you think that is something that is an absolute, why, and what are the nuances that they should have, come to bear and bring with them to the project that someone who's never done it before couldn't or would have to learn and maybe slow down the process? Rainey,
Well, I'll start.
Go ahead, Sharon. You start, please.
I was just going to say, I think it's important to at least have either adaptive reuse or renovation experience.
Right.
And your engineers, your architects, all of your structural engineer. I mean, you just think about the gambit. I mean, I think all of them can bring to the table lessons learned, and that's what you need in things like this. Is you can always take an old story or an old project and, well, we ran into this before, so I'm going to check that first this time. So I really think it's important, to have renovation or adaptive reuse.
Rainey, do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. Like I said earlier, if done properly, it can be less cost. Everyone can do an adaptive reuse. Anyone can come in and do an adaptive reuse, but it will take longer and it will cost more if you don't necessarily have that experience or people on your team that have had that experience. We create a best practices. We have a best practices checklist that tries to identify all the known unknowns. Like Sharon said, we've run into these things before, so we're going to look for them up front, and we check all of that. So our due diligence is pretty extensive. In addition to, we do a lot of market research. How can we capitalize on the history of the building, the location of the building, in addition to the architectural elements? But yeah, I mean, I think Sharon said it best.
I'll say it, without it, you're toast. Okay, you really are. I mean, it's just, and I take it the first one we did 7 years ago. We just went with the architect and a contractor. Yeah, it's fine, but it's so much more complicated than that now. And I would say, even when it's done, and now you're showing tenants through it, the big corporate tenants, the life science tenants, the first question they ask is, does the owner know what they're doing? Have they done a life science project before? Have they done a adaptive use call center before? Have they done a retail conversion before? Have they turned this space into, because and if the answer is no, they've moved to the next building, because they're not going to sit there and negotiate with someone who doesn't know what they're doing to deliver fairly intricate space that's going to require a lot of money to fit out, and it's going to be their home for a long time. They're not going to take that chance. You have to be completely ready to present yourself as a fully knowledgeable and professional team of people that can deliver the product from soup to nuts. And that includes the contractor, the engineer, the architect, all the permitting, et cetera. If you don't have that in place, ready, and actually living and breathing by the time those tenants are walking through, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, Ponce City Market, our pre-leasing stalled for a really long time, because you're talking about 2 million square feet on a 16-acre lot of a building, the largest brick building in the Southeast. And when the pre-leasing started, people are like, we don't believe that you can do it. We don't believe that you can do what you're saying that you can do. These are really pretty pictures and the renderings are fantastic. But until you get some people to sign on, like, no one wanted to be the first. And, we bought some deals on the front end for both office and retail in order to kind of get the ball rolling. And,
sure.
And we had already done Chelsea Market in New York. So
you had a track record. So
track record. Yeah.
Delivering. I think, part of it was there were developers that took that project on previously and couldn't make it work financially. It's a huge mammoth of a project. And once we finally got everyone to understand that Jamestown was self-developing a lot of it and self-funding it from their real estate funds in Germany, then people started having a little more comfort that we were actually going to be able to deliver it.
The scrutiny that comes from the ultimate user and the tenants in this now on the ownership team, not only their technical ability of delivery, but their financial wherewithal. It's critical today. It's the first question that's asked. That show me you can do this, and prove to me you can do it, and then we'll sign on, as Rainey said.
So I may come back to the team thing. I wanted to get one of the questions that came in. What do you find is the hardest property use to convert? For example, retail to multifamily, industrial to hotel, et cetera, in your experience?
Yes.
Yes.
They're all hard.
They're industrial is probably the hardest because there's no windows.
Right.
Yeah.
And no one wants to live in a building with no windows. No one wants to work in a building with no windows. It's not hard if you are not going for historic tax credits and you can add fenestration to the facade. Then it becomes a bit easier because you can punch a bunch of holes in it. But I would, my vote would go for industrial to anything. Is the hardest.
Sharon, do you have a?
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, the malls, without glass, you need light. I said it before. Yeah, you gotta have light. It's tough.
I've spent the last 2 years in Philadelphia a lot looking at a lot of old closed schools, and that's a tough one too. People think that's easy. That's a tough one too. Again, you got big floor plates. If you're going to go residential, you got to create light. It's just not the easiest. It's got all kinds of stairwells everywhere and open spaces, and that becomes tough too.
Okay. So real quick, I know some of you may need to have to jump off here. We've gone through an hour, but we're going to stay on for another half an hour. Like I said, continue to send questions in. The panels will respond. And this is recorded. So if you do jump off, you'll have access to whatever gets discussed in this next trailing bit here. But I want to go back to, and thank you for joining, by the way. But I want to go back to the team. Is there any, so when you're looking at the team and all the stakeholders and you look at the project team, is there any distinct piece or person or party that is different on adaptive reuse projects that may not exist or be part of a ground up or greenfield project? And if so, who are those people? What are their roles? And then even, you know, in your team, when you look at it, like who's worth their weight in gold? You just don't want to, I don't want to go to the lowest bidder for that or for this. Peter, you want to jump in on that maybe?
Yeah, my experience is the engineers, and structural engineers, mechanical engineers, because there's so many engineering aspects to these things that you don't see. Look, of course when you're gonna build something, of course you're gonna get an engineering team. They're gonna do your design. They're gonna do your structural design, and they can put your permit set together, and they're gonna give you the set of plans to go get stamped. But now you're working from the outside, from backwards. Okay, you're dealing with something that's engineered, okay, and you're going to re-engineer it. And the qualities of that engineering from any of those aspects is not necessarily readily apparent to you. You have to investigate that. And you have to have people who have done this before and know how to go about that process and making those assessments. So that's my experience.
Rainey, do you have anything? Is there any other people that you would add to these projects that you may not engage on a ground up new project?
I mean, certainly the historic tax consultant, if tax credits are going into the project, sustainability consultants. Yeah, I think all the team members having experience is important, but those are some of the additional consultants that I typically add.
Okay. There was another question that came in on the panel. Does anyone have experience with MOB spaces? So basically from other uses and adaptive reuse projects, basically converting them to MOB use. And if so, were there any lessons learned from that process that you could share?
The only experience that I've had in that sense was when we were working with Wake Med, the Oberlin Road project. It was a post office and they wanted to turn it into MOB, and it was tough. You know, it's all about that column spacing, and it was kind of an L-shaped building, so it didn't lend itself quite so great. They ended up tearing it down and starting new. That's really been the only one that I've had, you know, because it is just about column spacing and stuff that, you know, and getting all the plumbing in. I don't know. Good question though.
Rainey,
yeah. Well, I mean, I've done some consulting. I haven't actually delivered a project, but I've done some consulting on turning a former hockey rink into clinics. I've looked at former retail, turning those into pharmacy and or medical clinics. Dead malls lend themselves pretty well to medical type uses. The cool thing is we're using a product now called Dirt, which does kind of modular healthcare walls. And so it comes with all of the medical gas and all the connections in the walls and all the wiring, which of course you can put anywhere inside of any different type of product. And medical doesn't necessarily need as much light depending on what you're doing. So using Dirt and using that modular prefab product, we can pretty much put a medical use anywhere. And then And then when you're done, you can unclick all the walls and take them somewhere else.
Up and move them somewhere else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Peter, anything else to add to that? If you had anything?
No, we haven't done it, but we are, like Rainey said, we are looking at that now. Basically because of the dirt wall. 5 years ago, dirt wall was a great idea because you could use it for office, and now they can do. Now it comes, goodness gracious, and a crate all set to go. For medical, which is pretty staggering, and it opens up all kinds of possibilities in terms of delivering space that you wouldn't think you can deliver. So we've looked at a couple floors of buildings. Can we go medical with this? So,
Gotcha.
Yeah, and to that point, any specialized use, it's kind of the same answer. We're doing a food hall with modular prefab walls where we've got a space. We're doing 10 kitchens inside of it, and we just do a prototype kitchen, 250 square feet, and just bring it in modular. And it doesn't really matter obviously column spacing, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about uses like that, spaces are typically smaller. You don't need the massive spans that you would for an office user or industrial type use.
So Sharon, one of the questions too is, when the financial end game of a project, some developers take a parcel, they reposition it and then sell it. Some hold on to those pieces of property. How have you seen kind of the end game goal from a financial standpoint help influence or impact the decision-making process through the design and all those things?
Again, yeah, easy question, because it's all about that goal, that creating the goals at the very beginning. Because certainly if they're going to flip it, we're not looking at necessarily the materials, in the same way that we might. Most of the time, though, I have to tell you that most, I think about all the ones that I've been involved with throughout my career. I mean, most of them are in it. Like if you're at the table and you're looking at the site, you're kind of invested in it. Yeah. So I feel like, we always want to design with sustainability in mind and health and wellness and all that, right? So yeah, we have to think about it financially. Carpet paint, whatever, will certainly dictate depending on what the budget is. Budgets, and we laughed about contingency at the beginning. But gosh, coming in, you just got to be realistic about what it's actually going to take. What do you have? What's your roof? What's your walls? What's the glass? What's the energy? You've got to assess it in so many different ways. So yeah, drivers up front are important.
Rainey, do you want to weigh in on that at all, or are there any checkpoints into that? Okay. There's another question that came in. It says, is anyone looking at movie theaters, or have any of you done so and flipped the movie theater to another use, given COVID and movies are suffering economically and closing?
Looked at one in Charleston, North Charleston. It was a closed movie theater. We spent a lot of time trying to turn it both creative office and multifamily, and they sold it to a multifamily developer who knocked it down. So,
oh gosh.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing. We're looking at it as well. The cool thing is that movie theaters lend themselves really well to esports because of the column span. I've been on the front end of concepting for esports arenas, and they always want us to take out columns, and we're like, well, if we take out that column, the floor above is going to end up being the floor below. But movie theaters lend themselves really well to esports, entertainment type venues. I feel like we're trying to put Live Nation into every adaptive use I've ever been in front of, but I haven't actually done them now. We're trying to figure out how we can make deals happen and take it to the movie theater and say, hey, I know you're trying to close. Let us do this with your space.
You guys have brought up contingency. where do you guys try to keep that as a range, and what things have you guys seen that are really just always a culprit, like that money gets used for X more commonly than not on your projects? Peter?
Since the deals we've done are pretty big, it's always you need more power. Always need more power distribution. Always need it, and it's going to be a call center. You need more power. You need the pads outside. If it's life science, you can never have enough power. So that's been our experience in the 4 or 5 we've done.
And so, Peter, what do you like? Is that or Rainey? Is it 15%, 20%, 25%? Like, what do you hold?
To 10-15% more.
Yeah, 15 is what I've seen.
15 at a minimum. 15
Right.
like
15
a
at a minimum.
I would hold. I've gotten to the point now where we're going at 20 because, you know, a really crappy roof can blow your whole contingency.
Yep.
No kidding.
And they're all crappy roofs.
And they're all rotten. Exactly.
They're all rotten.
And they're usually 3 or 4 layers in, and the second and fourth are asbestos.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Right.
I was going to say, I think some of them may be abatements and things like that for the unforeseen.
Yeah.
I'm sure you run into that a ton. And I'd imagine that's somebody you definitely have on your team from a due diligence standpoint right up front.
that's the first one on the due diligence.
Yeah.
You know, is
Phase 1. Yeah.
hazardous materials. You've got to look at. You've got to go in and identify the LBP, the ACM,
Right.
check the dirt. You know, all those geo surveys and yeah.
All right. So trying to see if there's any other questions coming in from the audience. Don't have one here. I know we're getting close. We have a little bit more time. So what defines success for you on a project? Sharon?
Wow. I think for me, I'd say, and for our profession, you know, happy client, you know, great space that is used by community stakeholders. I love the what do you call them, kind of testimonials at the end of projects, especially when you hear, okay, here were the drivers, and then, you know, did we actually achieve them? Like, that to me is success. You know, I want to see the back end of that and make sure that we've created that for the client.
Peter, how about you?
You know, for me, it's really once you have the concept and the design and the strategy, it's really having that first tenant or the tenant that fits perfectly in what you created. You know, in other words, you found a user who not only had the same vision of you, but they're making use in every way of the vision and the product you delivered for them. Perfect example, actually, in Raleigh. You know, we set out to do this big creative office building, and now there's all these life science, and we're spending all this money for life science. And the first tenant we signed there is not a life science user; it's a lab user, but it's exactly what we envisioned. There's a corporate aspect to it where it's a place they're going to recruit really high talented engineers here from all over the country. So it's going to have a very high creative office aspect and, you know, modern office area to it. It's going to be a place for work, a showroom, so where they can bring clients and customers from all over to see it. But basically what's been designed and what's been delivered is absolutely perfect for what they're using it for. Great having a tenant paying rent. That's ultimately what our partners want. But it's also nice. It's nice to say, wow, this is actually the perfect user for the building. Perfect. Perfect. It's just really everything about it fits for what they want to use the building for, in image and in functionality.
Rainey, how about you? Success from the PM's perspective.
I mean, I think coming in close to schedule and close to budget is success. I mean, that's what our definition of success is. I think at Ponce City Market, what felt like success to me is you get so in the weeds on the details, and, you know, I would look at the floor and look at the ceiling and I would say, oh my gosh, you know, we could have done that better, or that could be better. But then when we finally opened and people started walking through it, and to see the looks on their faces and see them enjoying the space, that was what emotionally felt like success to me. And I finally started seeing it in the way that other people were seeing it, not through a project manager's lens, which felt pretty good.
So in your all's history of working on these adaptive reuse projects, you know, give me one that just like really sticks with you. Like, this outcome was so amazing. We couldn't even have tried to think that we would land it here. You know, but it was just turned out to be such a fantastic job, and it kind of hit these success metrics. But in the beginning, you could have never thought you would have ended there. Do you have any of those stories, how did you get there, and what was that end result?
You know, I'll talk about Raleigh only because it's a very current one. And again, we had this great design, and we were well underway in construction, 80% way through finishing the job to deliver, you know, 150,000 foot creative office, suburban building in Raleigh, with all the modern amenities you can imagine. And in March, we're like, oh my gosh, we're toast. Okay. But in the middle of all that, you know, all these life science users started knocking on our door. We didn't have the full life science zoning. We had 50% use for life science, but the users that were coming through were saying, wait a minute, no, I can't take 75,000 feet and only be limited to using 35. So we went to the city. We had to do a second upzoning, basically, reclassification. The first one was to remove a special use district was put on an old Walmart, and you know, we had to remove that, and the way they were structured means we really had to do a full rezoning because of how their code was written. Then all of a sudden, so in the course of 2 months, where we think we're going to be taking 3 more years to lease this thing, and maybe no one's ever going back to the office, to holy smokes, we're geniuses, because, you know, this is one of the hottest life science markets in the country, and everybody's looking for space, and you happen to have a high ceiling building. We love it. Great. So nothing that we did. So just so you know.
Hey, happy outcomes are good things.
Exactly.
Happy accidents, I mean. Sharon, how about you?
I would say there's 2. So this is way back in history. We took the old Murphy School that's downtown Raleigh near the Krispy Kreme, and turned it into Burning Coal Theater. And that was just, again, seeing the community use, you know, again, I don't know that the outcome, you know, the way you worded it, like, oh, is it, you know, something that we didn't figure, but I think we always thought it was going to be a great space, and then just to see people using it was great. I think another one is an example at Little is the Lakewood Montessori building. So that was really fascinating, and that it was an old YMCA, but turned into this Montessori school. You know, the YMCA and schools have long history, right? Durham public schools and stuff of, you know, after school programs and that kind of thing. And just hearing the team talk about that space and that case story of, you know, there were just these 4 boxes, and, you know, the nanatorium was actually filled in. Todd, I don't know if you were a part of that project, but, you know, they filled in the gym. The nanatorium, the you know, the pool and such. You know, there weren't any windows. They opened it up. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I guess in the end, all of these and our common ground here of what all of us has talked about is just how successful it is in the community, you know, and you're doing these projects that really matter, and really, you know, making projects come alive, revitalize, rejuvenate, you know, it's just such a great mindset, I think.
So Rainey, before you jump in, I just want to let everyone that's still attending know that if you guys want to turn on your cameras or even unmute your mics to ask the question in the last 15 minutes, feel free. But go ahead, Rainey. I want to give you the opportunity to jump on that one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think everyone kind of knows what I'm going to say, and that's not city market. but not for the reasons you think. We hit none of our success metrics. We didn't come in on schedule. We were $200 million over budget.
Oh, wow.
We didn't build what we set out to build. The scope changed so many times. You know, I worked for 4 years on that project, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I broke bones. I had, you know, boots full of concrete. My right lung collapsed at one point. People got divorced. I mean, it was intense.
Wow.
It was absolutely intense. But at the end of it, you know, we won the ULI Global Award. And when we were interviewed with the ULI, when they were selecting it, every single person on the team cried during the interview. I mean, that's the kind of project that, I mean, it changes your life. And it changed the landscape of adaptive reuse in Atlanta, because finally institutional money started taking notice and saying, you know what, this works. We couldn't get institutional money before. And that all changed with Ponce City Market. And then institutional lenders started signing up for adaptive reuse projects based on the success of that. It changed the neighborhood. It changed the community. Everything around it came up. And if that's not success, I don't know what is. And we did win that ULI Global Award. So I'm going to go so far as to say that we were the best project on the planet that year. So,
with literal blood, sweat, and tears associated with it.
Exactly. Absolutely. So that's my answer.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else in the audience have a question or want to pipe in real quick before we maybe close?
I just want to say, Rainey, I just love the honesty around that and hearing that, you know, because so many times, you know, we all, we're always on schedule. We're always on budget, you know, I mean, but that doesn't happen. I mean, and you got to work. That's back to the heart and the passion. Like, you got to have a team that is willing, and, you know, we'll have sweat equity in it all too, you know. I mean, it's just, we're all in this for the passion and that success. So I don't know. I just appreciate the honesty. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll echo that.
Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions or comments, I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists, to Peter and Rainey and Sharon. We appreciate your time, you sharing your stories, your intellect with us. It was awesome. So a great conversation. And again, for everyone that's listening, we'll get the information out. Please don't forget to fill out the survey. You guys too, as a panelist, you can criticize me as the moderator if you'd like to. Feel free. I'm sure we'll get plenty of comments at the end of this thing anyway. So, but thank you all very much. Have a great